Kim Woo-bin looks like the kind of man life should not be able to break. That was the first illusion his image sold so well. Tall, sharp, broad-shouldered, with the cold stare of a runway model and the rough energy of a bad boy who never needed to beg for attention, he did not enter Korean entertainment like a soft, romantic prince. He looked tougher than that, more dangerous, more distant. His face carried confidence, but not the sweet kind. It was the kind of confidence that made viewers believe he could walk into any room and disturb the air without raising his voice. In K-drama, where male beauty is often built around warmth, softness, and emotional availability, Kim Woo-bin felt different. He looked like rejection before he looked like comfort. He looked like the boy you should stay away from, which only made audiences want to look closer. That image became his weapon. The tall model body, the deep voice, the cutting smile, the gaze that seemed to hide more pain than kindness. He was not simply handsome, he looked unbreakable. Even when he played wounded characters, the pain never made him seem weak. It made him seem more magnetic, as if the damage only sharpened the danger around him. That was why audiences believed in the fantasy so easily. Kim Woo-bin looked like a man who could suffer and still stand taller than everyone else, and that is what made his real-life story hit harder. Because the man who seemed built to play strength was eventually forced into a battle where strength was no longer about posture, beauty, or attitude. It was about survival. In 2017, at a point when Kim Woo-bin had already become one of Korea's most recognizable male stars, his career suddenly stopped. He was diagnosed with nasopharyngeal cancer, and the industry watched a man known for looking almost invincible disappear from the screen. The contrast was brutal. Just before that, audiences had seen him as the arrogant rival, the wounded bad boy, the tragic lover, the kind of man who could carry pain and still look powerful. Then, real life stripped away the fantasy. There were no dramatic close-ups, no perfect lighting, no character arc written to make suffering beautiful. There was treatment, silence, distance, and the terrifying uncertainty of whether he would ever return. For fans, his absence did not feel like a normal hiatus. It felt like Korean entertainment had lost one of its strongest silhouettes. The man who had once seemed too sharp to fade was suddenly fragile in a way the public was not prepared to see. And that is why Kim Woo-bin's story is not just about beauty or fame, it is about the collapse of an image. He had spent years making vulnerability look stylish on screen, but cancer made vulnerability real. It turned the bad boy into a patient, the model into a survivor, the star into a human body fighting to stay alive. For a long time, the public had loved him because he looked untouchable. After the diagnosis, people began waiting for him because he was touchable, breakable, and still fighting. That shift changed everything. His silence became heavier than any role. His recovery became more emotional than any scripted tragedy. When he eventually returned, the question was no longer whether he still looked strong. The question was what strength meant after almost losing everything. Kim Woo-bin did not come back as the same untouchable man audiences remembered. He came back carrying proof that even the strongest image can break, and that sometimes the real power is not looking unbreakable, but surviving after life proves you are not. Before Kim Woo-bin became the man audiences knew from cold stares, wounded bad boys, and tragic romance, he first belonged to the world of fashion. That beginning matters because his body told a story before his acting did. He was tall, lean, sharp, and almost intimidating in the way models often are built less for softness and more for distance. On a runway, that kind of presence works instantly. You do not need to explain yourself. You only need to walk, hold the frame, and make people look. Kim Woo-bin had that from the beginning. His height, his angular face, his deep voice, and his unusual features made him stand out in a world where many male stars were packaged to feel clean, pretty, and approachable. He was different. He did not look like the sweet boy next door. He looked like trouble with perfect posture, but that kind of image can become a trap. A model entering acting is often judged twice, first for being beautiful, then for needing to prove he is more than that beauty. Kim Woo-bin had to fight the label of model actor, the suspicion that he had presence but not depth, aura but not emotion, height but not soul. And that is where his early journey becomes interesting. His first power was visual, but his real challenge was learning how to make that visual carry pain. He had to turn the runway body into a character's body. He had to make the cold face feel like it was hiding something. He had to make the audience believe that behind the bad boy image was not emptiness, but a wound waiting to be opened. As he moved deeper into acting, Kim Woo-bin began shaping one of the most recognizable images of his generation. The dangerous young man who looked cruel on the outside, but damaged underneath. He was not built for innocent charm. He was built for tension. That made him perfect for roles where confidence could turn into loneliness, where arrogance could hide insecurity, where anger could become a shield. Early on, the audience did not just see a handsome newcomer. They saw someone with a darker rhythm. His characters often seemed like men who would rather push people away than admit they needed anyone. That emotional pattern became his signature. He could stand still and look threatening. He could smile and make it feel like a challenge. He could say very little and still make the viewer wonder what kind of pain had made him so hard. This is why his transition from model to actor worked. He did not try to erase the coldness that made him striking. He used it. He turned distance into mystery, sharpness into charisma, and silence into emotional pressure. Before the massive fame of the Heirs, before the heartbreak of Uncontrollably Fond, before his real-life health battle changed the way people saw him, Kim Woo-bin was already building the foundation of a very specific kind of star. Not the man who comforts you immediately, but the man who makes you curious enough to stay. His early career was the making of that shadow, the bad boy shape, the wounded eyes, the cold surface, and the feeling that if the story pushed hard enough, something inside him might finally break. Kim Woo-bin's career peak began with a very specific kind of danger. He was not the man audiences were supposed to choose, but he was the man they could not stop watching. In School 2013, he stepped into the role of Park Hyung-soo, and suddenly his cold model aura found the right emotional shape. He did not feel like a polished young actor trying to look rebellious. He felt like someone who had already been hurt before the camera arrived. His body language was guarded. His stare was sharp. His silence had anger inside it. That was the first time many viewers understood what made Kim Woo-bin different. He did not need to soften himself to become interesting. He could stand there like a threat and still make the audience wonder what pain was hiding underneath. That is the secret of his screen power. He made cruelty look like armor. He made distance feel like a wound. And when the Heirs arrived, that energy exploded into full public obsession. As Choi Young-do, Kim Woo-bin became the ultimate dangerous second male lead, arrogant, rich, wounded, childish, cruel, lonely, and impossible to ignore. He was not written to be the perfect romantic hero. He was the boy who bullied because he did not know how to ask for love. He was the rival who smiled like he had already lost. He was the rich heir who had everything except the thing he needed most: emotional safety. And Kim Woo-bin played him with exactly the right poison. Every smirk felt like defense. Every insult felt like confession in disguise. Every moment of anger looked like a boy trying to cover abandonment with power. That is why Choi Young-do became unforgettable. He was wrong, often painfully wrong, but he was alive in a way that made viewers keep defending him, analyzing him, and remembering him long after the drama ended. The Heirs did not just make Kim Woo-bin famous. It turned him into Korea's bad boy fantasy, the man who looked dangerous enough to hurt you, but wounded enough to make you think you could understand him. Then, Uncontrollably, Fond took that entire image and made it tragic. As Shin Jun-young, Kim Woo-bin played a famous star facing a terminal illness, and the role felt almost cruel in how perfectly it used his public image. He looked powerful, untouchable, desirable, the kind of man who should have everything. But underneath the fame was a body running out of time. That contrast gave the drama its emotional weight. Kim Woo-bin was no longer only playing the bad boy who hides pain behind arrogance. He was playing a man who could not defeat the one enemy beauty, fame, money, and pride could not control: mortality. His performance turned the character into something heavier than a romantic lead. Shin Jun-young was not just a tragic celebrity. He was a man forced to love while already disappearing. His coldness became fear. His arrogance became regret. His distance became protection, because getting close to someone meant making the goodbye more painful. At the time, audiences watched it as melodrama. But after Kim Woo-bin's real-life diagnosis in 2017, the role became almost impossible to separate from reality. The actor who had played a terminally ill superstar soon stepped away from the industry to fight nasopharyngeal cancer. Suddenly, the pain on screen echoed too closely with life. The tragic role was no longer just a performance people remembered. It became a haunting shadow over his career peak. That is what makes this chapter so powerful. Kim Woo-bin reached his highest public image as the man who seemed strong enough to carry any wound beautifully, the school rebel, the rich bad boy, the doomed star. But life interrupted the fantasy at the exact moment his image felt strongest. He had made pain look cinematic. Then real pain arrived without music, without perfect lighting, without a guaranteed ending. And that is why his peak cannot be discussed only as fame. It was fame standing right beside fragility. It was the moment Korea saw Kim Woo-bin as almost unbreakable, just before discovering that even the strongest-looking man could be forced into silence. His career peak gave audiences the fantasy of dangerous strength. His illness revealed the human body underneath it. And when he eventually returned, viewers were no longer just looking at the bad boy they once loved. They were looking at someone who had lived through the kind of tragedy his dramas had only pretended to control. When Kim Woo-bin returned, he did not return as the same man the audience had lost. The old image was still there, the height, the sharp face, the deep voice, the gaze that could still make a room feel colder, but something underneath had changed. Before his illness, Kim Woo-bin's power came from looking untouchable. He looked like the bad boy who could take pain, swallow it, and turn it into charisma. After his recovery, that image became more complicated because the public no longer saw only strength, they saw survival. In Our Blues, his comeback was not just another role on a schedule, it felt like a quiet re-entry into life itself. Viewers were not simply watching an actor perform, they were watching a man step back into the frame after years of uncertainty, treatment, silence, and fear. Every calm expression felt heavier because the audience knew what had happened outside the script. Every simple scene carried the shadow of the years he had been gone. He did not need to act like the strongest man in the room anymore. His presence already carried proof that he had survived something stronger than any fictional rival, illness, or heartbreak he had ever played before. That is why his comeback felt emotional without needing to be loud. Kim Woo-bin had once made pain look stylish on screen, but after his real battle, pain no longer looked like an aesthetic around him. It looked lived in. It looked human. It looked like history behind the eyes of a man who had returned, not because the story demanded it, but because life had allowed him another scene. That is the legacy Kim Woo-bin is building now. Not just the memory of Choi Young-do from the Heirs, not just the tragic beauty of Shin Joon-young from Uncontrollably Fond, but the image of a man whose real life changed the meaning of his screen persona. Projects like Black Knight and Officer Black Belt show that he did not come back only to be pitied or protected. He came back to move, fight, work, and stand in front of the camera again with a different kind of authority. Before, his strength felt like attitude. Now, it feels like evidence. Before, his coldness made him attractive. Now, his quietness feels deeper because the public knows it may come from something real. And with his continued return to major projects, including his reunion with Suzy in Genie Make-A-Wish, Kim Woo-bin's current image is no longer just the man who looked unbreakable. It is the man who almost disappeared, then came back softer, quieter, and more powerful than before. That softness matters. It does not weaken his masculinity, it makes it more complete. He no longer needs to prove he can play arrogance, danger, or heartbreak. He has already lived through a kind of vulnerability no role could fully imitate. In the end, Kim Woo-bin's story is not only about beauty, fame, or illness. It is about what happens when a public image breaks, and the person behind it survives. He once made audiences believe strength meant never falling. Now, he makes them understand something more painful and more beautiful. Real strength is falling, disappearing, healing in silence, and still finding the courage to return.